It's really great to have all of you here today, and I just want to thank you for joining us. We are going to be talking about the Aging Initiative's pilot project grants. This is the informational webinar. This webinar is coordinated by the Aging Initiative, which is an NIA-funded initiative that bridges the expertise and leadership of two powerhouses in research on multiple chronic conditions. They are the Healthcare Systems Research Network and the Claude D. Pepper Older Americans Independent Centers, or Pepper Centers. The Aging Initiative is led by Jerry Gerwitz at the University of Massachusetts and Myers Primary Care Institute, along with co-PIs Jay Magaziner, who's at University of Maryland, and myself, and I'm here at Kaiser Permanente's Division of Research. Before we get started, I need to cover a few technical details, and Chris is going to be handling the slides on the other side. Due to the number of registrants for today's webinar, we have placed phone lines on mute to reduce audio feedback. However, we welcome and encourage audience participation using the Q&A or chat features of the webinar software. If you have technical or logistical questions, we ask you you submit those along with using the chat box. And please make sure that you are identified by either name or participant ID so that the webinar host will be able to troubleshoot any problems for you. We extend a huge thank you to Chris DeLude at the Myers Primary Care Institute, who works behind the scenes again to make these webinars possible. And he will be monitoring the chat functions today to help keep us up to date with any kind of troubleshooting with the technical issues. I would like to introduce the pilot project co-leads now for the Aging Initiative. They include myself, again, Elise Adams, and Dr. Elizabeth Bayless. I am Associate Director for Healthcare Delivery and Policy at the KP Division of Research in Northern California, and Liz is a Senior Investigator at the Institute for Health Research at Kaiser Permanente, Colorado, and a Professor of Family Medicine at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. Hi, Liz. We are also joined by two Aging Initiative Patient Caregiver Advisory Council members, Edeline Milton and Phil Posner, who will be presenting with us and providing more feedback and background related to stakeholder input for the pilot awards applications. Edeline is Director of the Office of Continuing Medical Education at Downstate Health Sciences University. She has extensive experience on education development, program management, instructional design, and adult education matters acquired during her career and years of service in Continuing Medical Education Association and boards. She has been a caretaker for an aging parent and is passionate about bringing awareness to older adults dealing with multiple chronic conditions and reducing disparities among these communities. Phil Posner is a semi-retired academic. He has a PhD in medical science with over 50 years of experience as a teacher and researcher in cardiovascular neuroscience studies. He currently volunteers as a patient advocate in cardiovascular and neuroscience issues, as well as patient engagement with the CORI, the National MS Society, the American Heart Association, CMS, and the FDA, and we're so pleased to have both of them with us here today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Liz, to talk about the pilot program. Thanks, Liz.
Liz, can you hear us?
I'm having some technical difficulties with the video, but hopefully you guys can hear me. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you now, yes.
We can hear you.
That's great. And I cannot see the slides very well due to whatever's going on here. Let's see. I think I'm better I'm up and running now. How's that? So I am happy to join Elise and this group on talking about the pilot projects. As you can see here, I think the first thing to say is that we're all happy to talk to you about any questions that come up, but hopefully this webinar will provide some information for you that will address questions in advance. They are one-year pilot projects and consistent with the Aging Initiative goals. They are focused on older adults with multiple chronic conditions. And the idea behind these pilot projects is to sort of help people prepare or get information they need or get preliminary results to increase the likelihood of successful future research proposals, whether those are R-series proposals, whether they're A-series career development awards. But hopefully these pilot proposals and projects will help folks get ready to do those. We're planning to award up to 3 grants. You can see the budget for those on the slide, which is $40,000. We recognize this is not as generous as all of us would like, but it is what we're able to do under the umbrella of the Aging Initiative. And really the scope is pretty broad. We welcome all types of research projects as long as there's a focus on multiple chronic conditions. As you can see in this slide, there are previously funded pilot awards that may give people ideas if you're looking for them. There's also a citation there in which Myra Tismanitsky put together this fabulous basically article that highlights research priorities for older adults with multiple chronic conditions. Next slide. There you go. There is a process for obtaining these pilot awards for submitting applications for them. We've put it into a 2-stage process so that we ask for letters of intent with specific aims and a bio sketch. And then those letters of intent are reviewed by a committee prior to asking for a submission of full proposals. And the idea behind this is several-fold. We get to give you some feedback on the idea and the project. As part of the LOI review, it's possible to communicate with the committee about questions that the applicant has regarding collaborators, that sort of thing. You can see the review criteria there, and these are written down so we can, in the pilot application, in the LOI application and the pilot application. And then you can see the dates there. There are some criteria that we ask be articulated in the LOI that have to do with not only the project idea, but also planned collaborators and planned direction for the work. Go ahead, Chris, to the next slide. And Elise, please chime in if I'm glossing over anything that you want to address in more detail. Just
sure, absolutely. Actually, do you want me to do this one? My apologies. I think I handed it over earlier than I should have.
Go for it.
Okay. Sorry.
Fine. Go for it.
So
we've both done this a few times, so we could probably both do it. In,
exactly.
In
Exactly. We're interchangeable at this point. So thank you so much, Liz. So yeah. So let me talk a little bit about the application requirements. We really did do a lot of thinking with the pilot program and trying to make it more accessible rather than less accessible. And so we've made some changes in order to try to do that. So as many of you know, the principal investigator on the application must be affiliated with either the OAICs or pepper centers or an HCSRN site, or be a current or former scholar. Some of our scholars are not at either of those institutions, but they are a part of our program because they're already scholars. Full specification of the study team is not required in the LOI. We understand it takes time sometimes to identify the right partners. And so really sort of we want just to know sort of what the general idea is and what the plan is in the LOI as opposed to the general plan, not sort of the specifics. We understand that will get developed over time before the full application is due. Each study team is encouraged to have both a pepper center and an HCSRN affiliated investigator and a junior investigator involved. However, this is an encouragement, it's not a requirement. In the past, we have required that you had to have both an OAIC and an HCSRN collaborator. We realize that that can be difficult to do, especially given the short turnaround time for these pilot applications. So while we still definitely encourage that, we'd love to see it. It's not a requirement at this time of the application. Early stage investigators may be principal investigators. They don't have to be the principal investigator, but we certainly encourage it. And being an early stage investigator is basically defined as not having received a major grant from NIH, AHRQ, or PCORI. And so you can't have an R01 or equivalent before being considered an early stage investigator. Career development awardees are considered early career investigators, and we certainly encourage applications from K awardees. Approval from the IRB at the appropriate institution will be required before funds will be released, but it's not required in order to submit the LOI or the full application. However, before funds can be dispensed, we must have the IRB in place. The LOI reviewer comments will be provided to incorporate changes into the full application among the awardees. Next slide, please. And so I think Liz is going to talk a little bit about the components of the full application for those who are invited to submit a full application. Thank you, Liz.
Sure. So if for applicants who are invited to submit a full application, you can see the components here. It is sort of the size of what an R03 or R21 application might be, including a face page with some logistical information, abstract, a specific aims page. And this says for the planned R01, but I think it's fair to say that we'd like a specific aims for the pilot project that does make it clear that it's being providing information for a future grant proposal. The R01 is not a requirement there, if I've got that right. The research plan goes on to be up to 6 pages, not including refs, and the human subjects section, which aligns with what Elise just said about making sure that there's IRB approval before starting the work. Biosketches in the new format, and then a budget that doesn't exceed the total cost of $40,000, including indirect costs. Budget justification and the checklist that's mentioned there. So it's pretty much a standard grant submission of an R03 type size that provides enough space to describe the project. Next slide. Great. The review criteria you can see listed here. There will be a full review committee that will include, I believe, community stakeholder review as well, so that the relevance will be to sort of ensure relevance to everybody and to get multiple perspectives. The first criterion is that the study be relevant to the older adult population with MCCs. We specifically are seeking pilot projects that leverage either HCSRN and its data or OAIC related data. The idea is to foster collaboration across these two groups of researchers, and the pilot projects are one vehicle for that. Obviously, methodologic rigor is a key component. The feasibility of doing the work within 1 year, we realized that over the past year, everything has been turned upside down by the COVID pandemic. However, we still would like people to anticipate getting their work done within the planned timeframe. And then finally, once again, the likelihood that the project will lead to a future grant submission. Let's see, go ahead. And I think I'm handing it off here.
Yes, that's right. Thank you so much, Liz. So we're going to hand it off to Adeline and Phil to talk about the importance of stakeholder impact with respect to the pilot awardees. Thanks so much, guys.
Adeline, would you like to kick it off?
Sure, Phil. So the Aging Initiative, as you can tell, is that we are part of the Caregiver Advisor Council representative. So Phil and I are two of the representatives that are currently talking to you today. So what we look for is on the application is to make sure that the application has the potential to impact the lives of patients and families. We thought that we want you to address how some of the research that you may be working on can engage patients and their caregivers. And as well as you know that more older adults have multiple chronic conditions, so and their life and health goals of patients are highly personal and important. So we want to make sure that you really focus on the engagement part of the patients and their caregivers on your application. So we look for that when we review the application. And we hope that your study proposed an improvement in their quality of life. So if you have any questions for us while we're here, so please feel free to ask us. Phil, do you like to add anything?
No, that's super. I add a little bit. I have a background with PCORI and really believe in patient-centered research. And so I think it's really important that the investigator has had contact with people that are going to be affected by the research. I was a basic science ion channel cell researcher, but I always thought about the translation of what I was doing, how it was going to affect the entire individual or population. And I think it's really important for the investigator to have access and have spoken with some older patients or caregivers who have multiple conditions and find out what their real needs and wishes and desires are, and see if what they're doing actually fits in with that sort of research. I think translation is really important. I think when you do your specific aims, again, thinking about the next steps after 1 year, because 1 year you can complete probably one specific aim, 2 at the most. But listing where you would go with this, think about how it would be disseminated to the patient population, as well as the clinical and the caregiver population, and whatever scientific cohorts you have, because that's critical. The best research in the world, if it doesn't get applied, is worthless. So those are the things that I would think you'd like to focus on is what are the needs of the community, and how is your particular research going to meet some of the needs of the community, and how are you going to implement it and get it applied down the road?
Yes, and to that, I would also add, yes, think about not just the patient, because, you know, the elder patient face a healthcare system that is often fragmented and inefficient. So it's also who is around that patient. And like Phil said, to add to the dissemination process of your research and what involves beyond the 1 year time frame or maybe 2 year time frame, and maybe elicit a different type of research area that can assist the patient.
Yeah, let me also give you another pearl as an ex-NIH-funded investigator. The group that will be reviewing your proposal, possibly 1 or 2 will be in the same field of research that you are. The other people probably will not, including the patients that are reviewing it or the caregivers. And so when you do your summaries and you do your introductions, don't blow people away with acronyms and abbreviations and inside language. One thing that I always did when I wrote my grant, I gave it to my department head, who was in a completely different field, and also showed it to my wife, who was in a totally different field, and see if they could understand what I was talking about. So in your introductions and overview, be magnanimous and explain it to people that can understand it, not using jargon.
Thanks so much, you guys. It's great advice. Next slide, please, Chris. Thank you. So I think
this has my initial. Oops, go ahead, Elise. It's all yours.
Oh, sorry. So I was just going to say, yeah, this is our timeline. So what we're looking at is an LOI submission date of November 13th. So that's coming up pretty soon. But again, the LOI is not designed to, it's sort of your idea, sort of who's going to be leading it. You don't have to have your entire team worked out, but really we're trying to get a sense of this as a good fit for the RFA. The invitations for those LOIs that we push forward to full application will be sent out December 18th. And then you will have a good more than 2 months, actually. I know there's a Christmas holiday in there, but and other holidays, but full applications won't be due until February 26th. So it gives you a little bit more time to flesh out the application itself. And then finally, notice that awards will go out around April after the full review. And then the early start date will be around June 15th, again, assuming that IRBs are in place by then. An online LOI application can be found at the URL on the screen, but this is the general timeline that we're looking at this year. Next slide, please. So these are just places you can get more information. You can contact Chris directly at the email shown, as well as going to our website. Sorry, that might be the last slide, I think. And I think now we sort of wanted to, I think, open it up to questions that people might have for any of us on the panel regarding the applications. You can either put them in the chat or, yeah, I was going to say probably put them in the chat, or if there's a way to raise your hand. I'm not as familiar with this particular application, so my apologies, but definitely put it in the chat if you have a question. Oh, and I see Nathan has a question, which is, would you say the description of how the pilot project will contribute to another research project is a one-page limit? Yeah, I think that would be certainly true. These are short applications. You don't have a lot of space to talk about the future. So I would say anywhere, sort of half a page, a full page is probably certainly the max. But really, we're trying to get a sense for how would this go beyond, right, the current study. So this shouldn't be a one-off. The idea is this should be helping you advance your careers in some way. And so the data that you gather, the information that you gather, the context that you make, something about this application should contribute to your ongoing work. I see another question, which is, how do you define MCCs? So the paper that you saw that Liz put up earlier certainly goes into more detail, but basically what we're talking about is you should be focused on individuals who have more than one chronic condition. So very simplistically, at least 2 chronic conditions. So if the application, for example, only focuses on patients with diabetes and only diabetes specifically, that would not necessarily be responsive. However, if it was about diabetes and depression, for example, or diabetes and hypertension, that would certainly meet the criteria. And some people certainly have many more diseases than that. I don't think this is a high bar. If you think about it, the vast majority of older adults already have more than one chronic condition. So it's really just more about what we're trying to do is get people to focus on the whole person, not a specific disease. And so by focusing on the whole person, it's very easy to imagine that very quickly you're going to get into the multiple disease category if you look beyond the disease framework and look towards a person-centered framework. It's very easy to see how multiple chronic conditions will come to play in that process. And so that's what we're asking for. And so
this is Liz. I also wanted to suggest that since this area is a little fuzzy about multiple chronic conditions, 2 or more chronic conditions, I would say it doesn't hurt to identify at the beginning, to sort of articulate and define at the beginning of your application what you're thinking of as the complexities that this patient population is facing, because it's often the case that older adults with multiple chronic conditions may also have some kind of social need or be at risk for depression on top of whatever else they have. And so the easiest way from my perspective is to just go with that baseline definition and then define it again for the readers when you write your proposal. And on that, along those lines, I'm seeing the follow-up chat question about whether type 2 diabetes and obesity are considered two conditions. I think it might depend a little on your outcomes. Because if it's very diabetes centric and the vast majority of people with diabetes are also managing obesity, it could be holistic, but it would depend a little bit on how the framing of the question was. That's pretty close to one, but not completely. I don't know what you think, Elise.
I would agree with that, but sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, there's a weird echo for a second. So what I would say too is in thinking about diabetes and obesity, you think about the reason we care about obesity is not just A1C and sort of microvascular complications, it's also the cardiovascular complications that people are at risk for. And so again, you can just see very easily how you could, by expanding out the outcomes as Liz is describing, very easily you come into this sort of multiple chronic conditions context. So perhaps not diabetes and obesity by itself, but certainly by focusing on outcomes that go beyond sort of glycemic related outcomes and also encompass, for example, cardiovascular outcomes, then you're already in the multiple chronic disease context as well.
This is Phil. Using a little bit of imagination, when you're dealing with diabetes and obesity, I think you need to think not only of chronic conditions, but think of risk factors. And so with the type 2 diabetes, you have a risk factor with the obesity of all of the cardiovascular problems that are out there, renal problems that are out there. And so I think it's fairly stretchable because a lot of these things If you're hypertensive, you're at risk of a number of things. If you have an arrhythmia, you're at risk of a number of things. If you have a number of the chronic arthritic diseases, you're at risk of a number of things. So I think the applicant should use their imagination. And they'll get that by talking to some of the older population. And they'll say, well, I only have one thing wrong with me. And then you start listening to their symptoms and how many doctors they're seeing and how many medications they're taking. And you realize they do have multiple chronic conditions, even though they're unaware of it.
That's great advice, Phil. And I think also, so the follow-up comment about the outcome was frailty. And certainly frailty is a patient-centered outcome. And so I think what we're just encouraging you to do is just spell out some of the other conditions that are likely contributing to that frailty, right? So in addition to diabetes, there are probably other factors that contribute to frailty in this population. And so just naming some of those up front, as Liz is suggesting, and really thinking about it holistically, as Phil is also saying, from the patient perspective, you're already there, right? But you probably do need to articulate it. And I think that's probably true for all of us. Phil mentioned this too, sort of, we're all very much, sort of experts, and they're sort of focused on our specific sort of areas of expertise. But sometimes it's important, especially when you're doing a pilot project like this, and you have a number of different people who may not be in your field looking at your application. It's going to be important to sort of define for them, this is a multiple chronic conditions application because, and lay it out, right? Don't assume that people will understand that there are other conditions underlying it. Sort of just spell them out. And it'll be helpful because it'll help other people make the connection who may not be working in your field. But to me, it sounds like you're already well on your way. Are there other?
If I could jump in also, the question about the pilot project contribute to another research project. One suggestion might be on your one page when you list your specific aims, list all of the specific aims and point out, these are the ones we will do in 1 year. These are the ones that we hope to address in future applications. And so that way you're covering it on your one page and not having to worry about space or whatever.
Yes, I think I agree with Alice. So many of us on the advisory board do not have a medical background, so we would need to clarify and be clear that the state that you are, the MCCs that you're talking about.
Thank you. And also keep in mind the LOIs, the whole purpose of the LOIs is for us to give you feedback. So don't worry, right? So the LOI is really to sort of test it out with us, right? And we'll let you know, sort of, oh, maybe you should cut this back, or maybe you could articulate that a little bit more. So please don't let concerns about, does this fit, stop you from submitting the LOI, because it's really the purpose of having an LOI. It gives us a chance to give you some feedback. So I see another question, which is, do the project endpoints have to be related to the chronic conditions, or can the project explore endpoints in the presence of MCCs? And so I think, yes, definitely it can explore endpoints in the presence of MCCs. I think the frailty example was one of them, right? So maybe you want to look at A1C, but you also want to look at frailty. Similarly, you might want to look at something like fall risk or something along those lines that isn't necessarily a clinical endpoint that you would think about with a particular chronic condition, but certainly that's something the chronic condition might contribute to in terms of quality of life for that older adult. So my implication would be yes for that one. I'd love to hear from others. And then a follow-up question was, do most funded projects utilize primary or secondary data sources? This is a great question. My advice, and I'm curious to hear from my colleagues as well, is that this is a pilot project. And so it's going to go really quickly. It's not a lot of funding. And so to the extent that you can take advantage of secondary data sources, I would strongly encourage you to do that. Now, that being said, you might find that doing, for example, like Phil was suggesting earlier, some in-depth interviews or something like that, and as part of your project to better understand the context of the conditions that you're looking at, that could be very useful. However, I would strongly encourage you to try to leverage existing resources and to plot out sort of manageable and feasible activities given the short time frame and the small amount of money. Right, so going out and working with a data set you've never used before, that's some huge data set that requires a lot of data management, or doing a ton of primary data collection probably doesn't make sense in the context of this small mechanism. But then again, like I said before, taking advantage of secondary data resources and or doing some primary data collection, particularly that qualitative data collection, could be very useful. I'm going to pause for a second to see if others have other questions about that, and then we have another follow-up question after that.
Yeah, I have found preliminary data that the investigator or the group the investigator has worked with is incredibly powerful because it shows the ability to complete the project, as opposed to saying somebody else has done this, but you don't have experience with it. It's something completely new to you. That's more useful for a postdoc training program. So I think we can cite other data, but I think you need to show that you are capable of completing the project in 1 year.
Yeah, that's great advice. We also got another question about could we get access to the presentation and the article to refer to with respect to this? The answer to that is yes. I think, Chris, is it okay will you be able to follow up with everyone who signed up via email?
Yes, we'll plan on reaching out to everyone by email with the recording, and then also it should be posted with the slides to the Aging Initiative website within the next day or two.
Thanks, Chris. Other questions or responses to the questions that have been asked so far? Great. This has been fantastic. Again, we are here to provide guidance and to help you work through the process of submitting these applications. So I do hope that you'll take advantage of us in the ways that we've described in terms of asking additional questions as they come up. Again, please note that the LOI process is for giving specific responses and comments on your application. So please don't not apply out of concern that you're not quite sure. I would rather see you apply, and then we can have a conversation about it than not. So please do apply. And yeah, so thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who presented today and for giving your feedback. It's very incredibly helpful. And we are really so pleased to have Phil and Adeline on the line. They have incredible experience as sort of patient caregivers, but also as scientists and professionals. And so they've got some really great advice for everyone. Adeline, you got a shout out for SUNY Downstate on the chat. I don't know if you saw that.
Me too. I'm a SUNY grad.
Yeah, exactly. We got a lot of representation here from SUNY, so that's fantastic. But thanks so much, everyone. Thank you, Chris, again, for organizing this call. And we will be, please do follow up with us and check out the website for more information. And please do send in your LOIs. We're really excited to read them. This is one of the favorite things that we do, is we get to see sort of your exciting ideas that you guys are developing. And we look forward to reading your applications. Liz, did you have anything else to add?
No, I don't. I'll just second everything you said. Look forward to reading any inquiries that you guys send along.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.